Anders Behring Breivik is a Norwegian far-right domestic terrorist responsible for one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in recent history. At the time of the incident, he was 32 years of age. Breivik placed a car bomb in Oslo near the office of the Norwegian first prime minister with the intention to murder the head of the government. When the bomb detonated, it resulted in the death of 8 people. Breivik dressed as a policeman and took advantage of the confusion generated by the explosion to start the second part of his plan. He traveled by boat to the nearby island of Utoya. On the island, a political event for young people was taking place. The Workers' Youth League had gathered for a summer camp. Breivik then started shooting them one by one. When the police finally captured Breivik, he had killed 69 people. These attacks took place on the 22nd of July 2011. Part 1. Breivik's childhood and mental health. Breivik was born on February 13, 1979. Breivik's father was a Norwegian diplomat working in London, and his mother was a nurse named Utoya Behring. His parents separated not long after his birth, and Breivik was raised by his mother. Mental health professionals agree that Utoya Behring had an extremely negative impact on the development and mental health of the young Breivik. In a report, she was described as having a borderline personality disorder, being depressed, and projecting her frustrations, aggression, and sexual fantasies onto young Breivik. The neighbors claimed to have heard noises of fights and that Breivik's mother would leave him completely alone for extended periods of time. The neighbors advised Breivik's mother to seek help from the government's institutions. Utoya obliged and applied for respite care for her son. She claimed that her son Breivik was clingy and demanding, that she felt overwhelmed and couldn't take care of him anymore. In 1983, when Breivik was 4 years of age, he and his mother were placed in a mental institution for a psychological evaluation. The result of the psychological evaluation was disturbing. The psychiatrists noted that Breivik was a child who displayed no emotions and was abnormally clean for his age. The expert observed that Breivik had a peculiar smile. The mental health professional described his smile as an unnatural gesture. Not a reaction coming from an honest emotion, but rather something Breivik learned to do because it was what everyone was expecting of him. Feign emotions is a well-known trait attributed to psychopaths. They usually start learning at a young age, and as they grow older, they become better at it. The mental professionals believe that his atypical behavior was shaped by her mother's strict control. Every time he would show any emotion or make a mess, she would overreact and punish him with severity. As a result, Breivik started repressing his emotions and became obsessed with cleanliness in order to avoid punishment. This was corroborated by her mother, who constantly complained about how troublesome and messy of a child he was. She also added that she had to be always on top of him to correct his behavior. During the observation period, and although she knew perfectly well that she was being observed, the staff reported having seen Breivik's mother saying to him that she wished he would be dead. Then a minute later, she would shift radically her emotional output. She would rush up to him. She would hug him and tell him how much she loved him. This unhealthy upbringing traumatized Breivik deeply. He would bottle up his emotions until he couldn't do it any longer and then burst into a turmoil of rage and anger. He was reported to have overreacted to meaningless little things, such as one time when he became extremely anxious because he found his toys disorganized. It was observed that Breivik would not cry, show joy, make eye contact, or make any effort to engage emotionally with the other children. The final report was that Breivik's mother was projecting her paranoid, aggressive, and sexual fears of men in general toward her own child. Breivik was the target of his mother's sexual fantasies mixed with primitive emotions such as rage and fear. By scrutinizing his behavior, she would look for any masculine qualities that she could deem as potentially dangerous or aggressive, and she would suppress them forcefully. By doing so, she was crippling the emotional development of the child. Later on, Breivik described his mother in an interview as, quote, "My mom, Utoya, was an apolitical moderate feminist." End of the quote. Wench's overly controlling and abusive behavior towards her son matches some radical views of modern feminism. Modern feminists claim that men are inherently tyrannical oppressors, while at the same time they affirm that gender roles are purely socially constructed. According to modern feminism, masculinity is a toxic trait that leads to oppression and has to be forcefully suppressed during childhood to prevent men from becoming oppressors. The experts also added that Breivik's mother started sexualizing him from an early age. She hit him frequently and often told him she wished he was dead. The experts wanted Breivik forcibly removed from his mother and placed in foster care. They stated that his mother was not fit to raise the child, and this was vital for the well-being and the emotional development of the child. However, despite the report of the mental health experts, the Child Welfare Service decided to find a foster home only for weekends. So Breivik was placed with a young couple only during the weekends, and the rest of the days Breivik would remain with his mother. It was reported that one time when Utoya brought her son to the foster family to spend the weekend, she told the young couple to allow Breivik to see and touch the penis of the man. Utoya told them that Breivik was only used to seeing girls' pee holes and needed male genitalia to compare it to himself. Breivik's father Jens Breivik found out about the situation and filed for full custody of the child. Once the mother knew that the father wanted custody of the child, she changed her mind, and although it was her idea to give Breivik up for adoption in the first place, after the father had shown interest to raise the child, she hired lawyers and demanded full custody of the child. In the legal custody dispute between the father, the mother, and the child services, it was Breivik's mother who won the legal battle and maintained full custody of the child. This was achieved because 1. A report from the daycare where Breivik grew up stated that Breivik was a happy, normal child, and 2. The social worker who represented the agency had no previous experience and did a poor job presenting the case. In the end, the committee decided to give full custody of the child to the mother with the condition that the family would be supervised regularly. However, the supervisions were discontinued after the third visitation. After this episode, Breivik was never supervised or put in foster care again. Part 2. Breivik's adolescence and radicalization. In his adolescence, Breivik's behavior was described as rebellious and destructive. At the age of 16, Breivik was part of a graffiti and hip-hop community in Oslo West. Breivik was caught and fined several times for painting graffiti on walls. According to his mother, it was at this time that Breivik's father stopped talking to him. However, his father claimed that this was not true and said that he was always willing to talk to his son. He added that it was Breivik the one who actually broke off the contact between them. After a quarrel with his best friend, Breivik stopped being part of the hip-hop community and distanced himself from the group. As a young adult, Breivik failed to join the army. Despite the several pictures of himself proudly wearing a military uniform, he never actually served in the Norwegian army. Even though it is mandatory in Norway for all males to serve in the military, the Norwegian Defense Security Department deemed him to be unfit for military service. In his early 20s, Breivik became obsessed with his appearance. According to his former friends, Breivik had cosmetic surgery on his chin, nose, and forehead. He also became obsessed with the idea of looking big and strong. He started lifting weights and using anabolic steroids. It was also at this time that Breivik joined the Progress Party, a right-wing political movement focused on anti-immigration in Norway. At the age of 21, Breivik started working in a customer service department. One of his former colleagues described him as kind and nice to everyone, while another colleague said that behind the mask Breivik was in truth nothing but a narcissist with a big ego. Later on, Breivik started his own computer programming business. The business was reported to be successful financially, and later he used these same profits of the company to finance the terror attack. At the age of 23, in 2002, Breivik chaired the local Vest Oslo branch of the party's youth organization. 2 years later, at the age of 25, in 2005, Breivik joined a gun club where he learned to handle guns of different types. In this same year, Breivik visited a woman from Belarus that he met on a dating site. And later, this same woman visited him in Oslo. This was confirmed by the prosecutor of the case. In 2006, Breivik left the Progress Party and later he declared bankruptcy to the company he had founded. Planning and preparation of the attack. According to Breivik himself, he started planning the attack in 2002 when he was just 23 years of age. Breivik had several misadventures with his business and ended up filing for bankruptcy. Yet he managed to save 2 million kroner or around $190,000, which he used to finance the attack. In 2009, Breivik started another enterprise. This time was a farming sole proprietorship set up to cultivate vegetables and fruits. In 2010, Breivik visited Prague in an attempt to buy illegal guns. He was unsuccessful, but later he managed to buy the guns in Norway by using legal channels. He bought a semi-automatic 9mm Glock 34 pistol by demonstrating his membership in a pistol club in the police application for a gun license, and the semi-automatic Ruger Mini 14 rifle by possessing a hunting license. In his manifesto, Breivik stated that he used shooting game simulators such as Call of Duty to acquire target accuracy. In June 2011, he moved to his farm that was located in a rural area about 140 kilometers or 87 miles away from Oslo. Breivik used the farm company as a cover-up to legally obtain large amounts of artificial fertilizer and other chemicals to manufacture the explosives he used in the attack. The timeline of the terrorist attack. On the 22nd of July 2011, Breivik parked a van in Oslo's government district in front of Prime Minister Jens Stoltenberg's office. The van contained a large explosive he claimed to have manufactured himself. His goal was to murder the head of state of Norway. Footage shows Breivik walking away dressed as a police officer after had parked the van. At 3:25 p.m., the car bomb was detonated, killing 8 people and injuring hundreds.
Oh shit.
Prime Minister Jens Stoltenberg was unharmed during the attack. At the time of the explosion, he was not at the office. While the capital of Norway was in complete disarray, Breivik used the opportunity to initiate the second part of his plan. Dressed as a police officer, he used the ferry to reach the island of Utoya. At 5:18 p.m., Breivik lands on the island of Utoya, 38 kilometers northwest of Oslo. There, the Norwegian Labour Party's youth was gathering for a summer camp. While dressed as a police officer, Breivik started to shoot the youth present in the island. Some of them tried to run or hide, but being Utoya an island, the victims had little options to find shelter. In a desperate attempt to survive, some of the victims jumped to the water and tried to swim to safety. However, Breivik saw them and shot them before they reached the shore. At 5:24 p.m., the Norwegian police were notified of the shootings at Utoya. At 6:01 p.m., Breivik calls Norway's emergency number and tells them he wishes to surrender to the authorities. However, instead of stopping the massacre, he resumes the killings. An hour after the police were notified of the incident, at 6:26 p.m., the Norwegian SWAT team finally landed on the island of Utoya. At 6:34 p.m., Breivik is finally arrested by the police and placed under custody. He surrendered without offering resistance. When he was finally arrested, Breivik had murdered 69 people. Some of them were as young as 14. Breivik was held in the island and interrogated throughout the night. He admitted to have committed the crimes and said the purpose of the attack was to save Norway and Western Europe from a Muslim takeover. He explained he had targeted the Labour Party because they were the responsibles for having promoted the situation. During the interrogation, Breivik referred to himself as the greatest monster since Quisling. On July 25, 2011, Breivik was charged with terrorism and held in captivity until the trial. Motivation to commit the crimes. Breivik described his actions as an act of self-defense against what he calls a Muslim invasion of Europe. On the day of the attack, Anders emailed a manifesto entitled 2083, a European Declaration of Independence, where he expresses his ideologies and motivations to commit the crime. He states that his main motivation to commit the crimes was to publicize his manifesto. In the manifesto, he calls for the deportation of all Muslims from Europe and blames feminists for a European cultural suicide. Breivik has identified himself as a fascist and a Nazi who practices Odinism. Breivik's mental sanity and psychiatric evaluations. Breivik was submitted to his first psychiatric evaluation in 2011. According to the report, Breivik displayed a severe lack of empathy associated with delusional thoughts of grandiose. He described himself as the future regent of Norway, the master of death and life, and Europe's most perfect knight since World War II. According to him, Norway was in a low-intensity civil war, and he had been chosen as a warrior to free the Norwegian people. He further explained that he had further plans to execute thousands of traitors, and he wanted to organize a reservation with the purpose of selective breeding. He was deemed to be both suicidal and homicidal, and was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and declared criminally insane. If this diagnosis was to be upheld, Breivik would be deemed unfit to stand trial and placed in a mental institution. According to his defense attorney, Breivik was surprised with the diagnosis and even felt insulted with the results. The first diagnosis was heavily criticized by the general public and by many other mental health professionals, so a second team was called to reevaluate Breivik. The second team concluded that Breivik was not psychotic during the attacks. They diagnosed Breivik with narcissistic personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. Despite being still labeled as mentally ill, this second diagnosis made him mentally fit to stand trial. This second decision pleased Breivik because he wished the massacre to be labeled as a political statement rather than the actions of a mentally ill person. Later he stated, "I must admit this is the worst thing that could have happened to me, as it is the ultimate humiliation. To send a political activist to a mental hospital is more sadistic and evil than to kill him. It is a fate worse than death." End of quote. Trial and other events. On July 25, 2011, 200,000 people attended a Rose March in Oslo to commemorate the victims of the attacks. Prime Minister Stoltenberg calls Breivik's attacks the worst act of violence in the country since World War II. During the pre-hearing of the trial in February 2012, Breivik read a prepared statement demanding to be released and treated as a hero, and added that his attacks were perpetrated only against traitors. He stated, "They are committing or planning to commit cultural destruction, including deconstruction of the Norwegian ethnic group and deconstruction of Norwegian culture. This is the same as ethnic cleansing." March 15, 2012. Norway's National Police Commissioner Øystein Mæland apologized for the police's slow response in a press conference. "It is hard, knowing that so many lives could have been spared if the perpetrator had been arrested sooner." On the 12th of April 2012, psychiatrists found Breivik to be legally sane, contradicting a previous diagnosis that Anders was a paranoid schizophrenic. April 16, 2012. The criminal trial started. Anders admits to have carried out the killings but denies criminal responsibility. According to his statements, the attacks were politically motivated and necessary to raise awareness. April 26, 2012, 40,000 people gather in Oslo to sing Children of the Rainbow, a children's song by Pete Seeger. During his trial, Breivik expresses his hate for the song, which he claims to be a symbol of cultural Marxism. June 22, 2012. Breivik's trial comes to an end. Family members of the victims walk out after Anders' remarks. His lawyers argue that Anders should be declared sane. August 13, 2012. The Jorv report is released, which determines that the Norwegian police didn't do enough to prevent the deaths. The report states they could have prevented the bombing, and they could have arrived on the island of Utoya sooner. Once the report became public, Øystein Mæland, the Norway's National Police Commissioner, resigned from his post. Sentence. On August 24, 2012. Breivik was convicted of mass murder, causing a fatal explosion and terrorism. He was deemed sane and deemed responsible for the death of 77 people. Anders was sentenced to 21 years in prison in a form of preventive detention, which requires a minimum of 10 years of incarceration. Norway has neither the death penalty nor life sentence, yet the court has the power to continuously hold him as prisoner if they believe the prisoner might represent a danger to society. This is the maximum a criminal can be sentenced in Norway's penal code. Anders stated he did not recognize the authority of the Oslo District Court. Therefore, he would not make an appeal. In 2016, Breivik sued the Norwegian Correctional Service claiming that his solitary confinement violated his human rights. The justice system concluded that his rights had not been violated and closed the case. In 2017, Breivik filed a complaint, this time to the European Court of Human Rights, regarding his confinement. The case was dismissed in 2018. In January 2022, Breivik became eligible to parole and he made his first parole appeal. The court refused his appeal. According to Norwegian laws, Breivik has now the right to appeal for parole every year. Critics claim that although Breivik knows perfectly well he will never be released, he's taking advantage of the system and using the hearings as a platform to keep promoting his racist ideologies.